It was one of those nights when everything seemed far beyond reach for ordinary people. The ballroom sparkled under golden chandeliers, their lights reflecting off the polished marble floor. Gentle music filled the air. Soft laughter floated between tables, and the guests, dressed in glittering gowns and tailored suits, spoke in voices that carried confidence and money. Every corner of the room whispered of wealth and status. Amid the grandness of it all, a young waitress moved carefully between the tables, holding a silver tray close to her chest. She kept her head slightly bowed, making sure not to disturb anyone. Her shoes were plain, her uniform neatly pressed but simple. She wasn't meant to stand out in a place like this. Her job was to serve, smile, and disappear into the background. The event was one of the most talked-about charity galas of the year, a gathering for the city's most successful and powerful people. There were business owners, politicians, and socialites, all gathered under one roof to celebrate their generosity. Cameras flashed near the entrance, and every arrival was announced with admiration. The guests exchanged compliments, pretending warmth while measuring one another quietly behind polite smiles. Near the far corner of the room stood a magnificent grand piano. Sleek, black and shining under the golden lights, it had been placed there for a live performance that evening. The pianist, a well-known performer, was supposed to be the highlight of the night. Everyone was waiting for the moment the soft background chatter would fade and the hall would fill with classical music. But as time passed, whispers began to move through the room. The pianist hadn't arrived. The event's host, dressed sharply and sweating under pressure, was seen talking hurriedly with his staff near the stage. The guests were growing restless. "What's going on?" one woman asked. "The performance should have started by now," another said impatiently. The young waitress overheard the murmurs as she poured water into glasses. She looked toward the piano for a moment, her heart giving a small familiar ache. That instrument, the way it glistened, the way the light touched its keys, felt like an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. For a long time, music had been her life. She had spent countless hours learning to play, practicing until her fingers hurt, dreaming of performing on a stage like this. But life doesn't always move in the direction of dreams. Circumstances had changed, and those dreams had quietly slipped away, replaced by the steady rhythm of survival. The host's voice brought her back to the present. "The pianist isn't coming," he muttered to one of the organizers, frustration in his tone. "He got stuck at the airport. We can't have a silent hall. We need someone to play. Anyone." There was panic in his voice. The event had been planned for months. Everything depended on perfection. A missing pianist wasn't part of the plan. The staff exchanged helpless glances. For a few moments she stood still, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Then, before she could stop herself, she took a small step forward. I can play," she said softly. The words felt strange leaving her lips. The people around her turned in surprise. The host blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "You can what?" "I can play the piano," she repeated, her voice still quiet but steady. For a second there was silence. Then a few chuckles spread among the nearby guests who had overheard. "The waitress can play?" someone said with a smirk. "This should be interesting." Another voice added mockingly, "Maybe she'll play us a lullaby while she cleans up afterward." The laughter grew, soft but sharp enough to sting. She felt her face warm, but she didn't back away. The host looked her up and down, unsure whether to take her seriously. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, trying to sound polite while clearly doubtful. "Yes," she said firmly this time. "If no one else can, I'd like to help." The host glanced at the restless crowd, then back at her. He sighed. "Fine, we don't have a choice. Just make it quick." She nodded and placed her tray aside. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her eyes carried a calm determination. The other waiters watched in surprise as she slowly walked toward the piano. The laughter had quieted a little, but whispers still floated around. "She can't be serious. This will be a disaster." "Well, at least we'll have something to talk about." The guests' voices faded as she reached the piano. The smooth surface reflected her face, nervous but focused. She gently pulled out the bench and sat down. For a moment she just looked at the keys, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes to steady herself. Memories flooded back. The quiet hours spent practicing in small rooms. The joy of learning a new piece. The comfort of music when words couldn't express what she felt. She She hadn't played in years, but her heart remembered. Music was still there, waiting. The host cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said awkwardly, "we'll have an unexpected performance tonight. Let's give her a moment." A few people laughed softly. Others pulled out their phones, ready to record what they thought would be an amusing scene. The young woman didn't look up. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. The cool touch of the ivory felt familiar, almost like shaking hands with an old friend. The room fell into uneasy silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then softly, she pressed the first key. The sound was clear, beautiful, and strong, a single note that seemed to echo longer than it should have. It carried something unexpected, emotion. Heads lifted. Conversations stopped. Her fingers began to move, slow at first, then flowing with growing confidence. The melody filled the air, rich and full of life. The laughter faded completely as the room was swept into sound. Her playing was not just skilled, it was full of feeling, the kind that comes from years of quiet pain and unspoken dreams. Every note seemed to tell a story of loss, hope, and hidden strength. The audience, who moments ago had mocked her, now found themselves frozen in place. The air in the room felt different, heavier somehow, filled with emotion. Even the chandeliers seemed to shimmer more softly, reflecting the rhythm of her music. The host stood near the stage, unable to move. The arrogance that had filled the room moments earlier had turned into awe. The waitress, the one no one had noticed all evening, now held the entire room in her hands. For her, nothing else existed in that moment. The people, the laughter, the doubts, all disappeared. It was just her and the piano. She played as though she were speaking directly from her soul, pouring every unspoken word into the keys. By the time the last note faded, the room was utterly silent. The sound lingered like a whisper hanging in the air, refusing to leave. The guests stared, not knowing what to say or do. And for the first time that night, the young waitress lifted her eyes and looked at them, not with pride or challenge, but with quiet peace. She stood up slowly, her hand still trembling slightly, and stepped back. No one laughed now. What had started as a night of luxury and status had suddenly turned into something else, a moment none of them would forget. For a few long seconds, the entire hall stayed completely still. The sound of the final note seemed to hang in the air, like a soft echo that refused to fade. Every guest sat frozen in their seat, not knowing how to react. The same people who had laughed moments earlier now stared in stunned silence. The young waitress sat there quietly, her hands still resting on the piano keys. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her face was calm. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her chest. It was as if time itself had stopped. Then slowly someone began to clap. It was a single pair of hands at first, hesitant but sincere. The sound broke through the silence, and soon the entire room followed. The applause grew louder, spreading through the hall until it filled every corner. People were standing now, clapping, cheering, and even shouting. The same mouths that had mocked her were now calling out in admiration. She blinked, overwhelmed. Her heart felt full, almost too full. She had never played for such a large crowd before, and she certainly never imagined doing it in a place like this. For a moment, she didn't know whether to smile or cry. The host, who had been watching from near the stage, hurried forward, his face red with surprise and embarrassment. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. "That was," he began, struggling to find words. "Absolutely incredible." He looked around at the applauding crowd, still trying to understand how a simple waitress could perform like that. She gave a small nod, her eyes lowering politely. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely reaching above the noise. The applause continued for several more moments before people finally began to settle back into their seats, still talking excitedly. Some guests were shaking their heads, others whispering in disbelief. "Who would have thought?" one woman said, fanning herself with her program. "She plays better than the man they hired." Another added. "I almost feel guilty for laughing," a man muttered under his breath. The waitress stepped away from the piano and picked up her tray again, intending to quietly return to her duties. But the host stopped her gently. "Wait," he said. "You can't just go back to serving drinks after that." She gave a small smile. "It's okay," she replied. "I'm here to work. That's what I came for." But the guest didn't let her fade into the background again. Many approached her, eager to speak. Some wanted to compliment her, Others wanted to know how she learned to play like that. Questions poured out from every direction. Where did you study? How long have you been playing? Why didn't anyone know about your talent? She answered quietly, choosing her words with care. She told them she had played since she was a child, that music had always been her dream. But life had been difficult. There were bills to pay, family to care for, responsibilities that couldn't be ignored. The piano had become a part of her past, until that night. As she spoke, the room grew quiet again. Her story touched something deep in the listeners. Many of them, so used to living comfortably, couldn't imagine what it would feel like to give up a dream because of necessity. There was something powerful in her simplicity, something real in her calm acceptance of life's hardships. One of the guests, an older man sitting near the front, looked thoughtful. He leaned toward the person next to him and said softly, "She has more class than half the people in this room." The words carried, and several heads turned in agreement. Meanwhile, the staff watched from the sides of the room with quiet pride. They had seen her every day, polite, hardworking, never complaining. None of them had known she carried such talent within her. To them, she was one of their own, and seeing her win the admiration of people who had once looked down on her filled them with quiet satisfaction. The host, eager to keep the atmosphere alive, stepped forward again and raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a bright smile, "let's give her one more round of applause." The audience obeyed immediately, clapping loudly once more. Some even stood up again, cheering her name though they didn't know it. The young waitress blushed and lowered her eyes. "Thank you," she said again, trying to hide how moved she felt. When the applause finally ended, she stepped aside, her hands still shaking slightly. She didn't know what to do next. She hadn't expected any of this. Not the performance, not the reaction, not the emotions it stirred inside her. She looked around the hall, noticing how different the energy felt now. The coldness and pride that had filled the room earlier had melted away. The guests who once carried themselves like they owned the world now looked humble, even inspired. A few approached her again, offering kind words and warm smiles. One woman wearing a diamond necklace took her hand gently and said, "You reminded us what real art is, something that comes from the heart, not from fame or wealth." The young waitress smiled, unsure how to respond. Compliments were nice, but she didn't play for them. She had played because, in that moment, she couldn't stop herself. It was as if the music inside her had been waiting for a chance to breathe again. As the night continued, conversation shifted. No one was talking about business or luxury anymore. The focus of the evening had changed completely. People spoke about passion, talent, and humility. The gala, meant to celebrate wealth and influence, had instead become a lesson about humanity. From across the room, a small group of musicians who had been part of the event's orchestra approached her quietly. They congratulated her and asked if she would ever consider performing again, maybe even joining their group for future events. She didn't know what to say. The idea felt too big, too far away. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I just wanted to help tonight." But one of them smiled kindly. "Sometimes," he said, "the best things happen when we don't plan them." Her heart softened at his words. Maybe he was right. Maybe some moments were meant to happen exactly when they were supposed to, no matter how unlikely they seemed. Later that night, when the guests began to leave, many stopped by to thank her once more. They shook her hand, wished her well, and even asked for a picture with her. She found it strange, and a few hours ago they hadn't even noticed her carrying their glasses, and now they were treating her like a celebrity. As the hall finally grew quiet, she helped the staff clean up just as she always did. She wiped the tables, gathered empty glasses, and stacked chairs neatly. Her co-workers told her she didn't have to, that she'd done enough, but she insisted. "I'm part of the team," she said simply. When the lights dimmed and most of the guests had gone, she walked past the piano one last time. The instrument stood there silently, reflecting the soft light from the chandeliers above. She reached out and gently touched one of the keys, pressing it softly. A faint note echoed through the empty hall. She smiled to herself. That single note carried a meaning only she understood. It reminded her that the part of her she thought she'd lost, the musician, the dreamer, had never really gone away. It had just been waiting for the right moment to return. As she left the ballroom and stepped into the quiet night, the cool air brushed against her face. She felt lighter somehow, freer. Maybe nothing in her life had changed yet. She was still a waitress, still living day by day. But something inside her had shifted, and even though she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for certain. She would never again doubt the music inside her. The next morning, the city looked the same. People rushing to work, cars honking and shops opening just as always. But for one person, the world felt quietly different. The waitress woke up still hearing the sound of the piano in her head. The memory of last night played again and again. The bright lights, the applause, the disbelief on people's faces. For years she had worked behind others unnoticed, and in one unexpected moment, she had become the center of a story she never imagined. As she got ready for another long shift, she almost laughed to herself. "Back to reality," she whispered quietly. The performance felt like a dream, something beautiful but fleeting. She didn't expect it to mean anything more than that. When she reached the restaurant that morning, something felt different. Her co-workers greeted her with wide smiles and excitement. "You're famous," one of them said, barely able to hide their joy. Another added, "Have you seen your video? It's everywhere." She frowned, confused. "Video?" They pulled out their phones and showed her. Someone from the gala had recorded her playing. The video had spread overnight, shared across social media, reposted again and again. The title read, "Waitress Shocks Elite Guests with Piano Performance." In the clip, she saw herself sitting at the grand piano, looking nervous at first, then completely lost in the music. The comments under the video were filled with awe, pure talent. She played like she carried the soul of 1,000 dreams. Can't believe people laughed at her before this. She's a reminder that talent has no uniform. Her hands trembled as she watched. She didn't know what to feel. Pride, fear, disbelief, or all of them at once. She never wanted attention, yet now the world seemed to be looking right at her. By midday, customers at the cafe started recognizing her. Some came in just to see the girl from the video. A few asked for pictures, while others simply smiled warmly when she served them. Every time someone mentioned her performance, her heart raced a little faster. She wasn't used to being noticed. Later that afternoon, the manager called her into the office. She thought for a moment she might be in trouble. Maybe the attention was bad for the restaurant. But the manager only smiled and said, "You did something amazing. We're proud of you. Just remember to stay humble." She nodded, grateful but quiet. Deep down, she still didn't fully understand what was happening. Meanwhile, across the city, the people who had attended the gala were still talking about her. The video had reached them too, and now they watched it again, this time with softer hearts. Some of them even felt a little ashamed of how they had acted that night. They remembered their laughter, their quick judgments, and the way they had looked at her before she played. Now they spoke differently. "She taught us something," one of the guests said in a board meeting that morning. "We think we know who people are based on where they stand, but we don't." Another replied, "It's funny. We go to these events to feel important, but it took her music to make us feel human again." The story spread quickly beyond that circle. Newspapers wrote small articles about her, calling her the waitress pianist and the hidden talent. TV stations showed clips of her performance, and morning talk shows discussed her story as a symbol of humility and hidden greatness. She watched some of it in disbelief. It felt strange seeing her own face on the screen, being talked about by people she had never met. She hadn't done it for attention. She had only wanted to help when the pianist didn't show up. Yet somehow that small act had opened a door she didn't even know existed. That evening, as she walked home, she passed a small music store she used to visit years ago. In the window, a piano sat under a soft light. She stopped and stared at it for a long time. Her reflection looked different now, not because of fame, but because something inside her had changed. For years she had told herself that her dreams were too far away, that real life had no space for them. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe dreams never really die. They just wait quietly until we're brave enough to reach for them again. The next day, she received a message from someone claiming to be a local concert organizer. He said he had seen her video and wanted to meet. She hesitated at first, unsure if it was real or just another empty offer. But after some thought, she decided to go. When she arrived at the small office, the man greeted her warmly and told her how deeply her performance had moved people. He offered her the chance to play at an upcoming community concert. Nothing fancy, just a local event open to everyone. "You don't need to be a star," he said. "You just need to play from the same place you did that night." Her heart beat faster. She wasn't sure she was ready. "I don't even own a piano," she said quietly. He smiled. "We'll take care of that. Just bring yourself." On her way home, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of performing again both scared and thrilled her. She had spent so many years hiding her talent that showing it again felt like learning to breathe after being underwater. That night, she sat by her small window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The sound of passing cars mixed with the faint hum of life outside. She thought about her mother, who had always told her to never give up on her gift even when life got hard. She wished her mother could have seen what happened at the gala. Maybe she did, in some unseen way. Over the next few days, more people reached out. Some offered to sponsor her music lessons. Others simply wrote kind words of encouragement. Strangers sent letters saying how her story had touched them, how it reminded them to believe in themselves again. Through all of it, she stayed humble. She still worked her shifts, served food with a gentle smile, and helped wherever needed. But inside her, a quiet hope began to grow, a small flame that refused to go out. When the night of the community concert arrived, she stood backstage, her hands shaking slightly just as they had before. The audience wasn't filled with the rich or the powerful this time. They were ordinary people, families, workers, students. And yet the nervousness felt the same. As she sat down at the piano, she closed her eyes and remembered everything that brought her here. The laughter, the doubt, the silence, and finally the applause. Then she began to play. The music filled the hall, gentle and honest. It wasn't about perfection or fame. It was about truth. And as she played, she realized that what mattered most wasn't how many people listened, but how deeply they felt. When the song ended, the audience rose to their feet, clapping not just for her skill, but for her courage. The courage to rise above judgment, to reclaim a dream, and to remind everyone that true beauty often hides in quiet hearts. As she stood there, the sound of their applause washing over her once again, she smiled. This time it wasn't surprise or disbelief she felt. It was peace. She finally understood that sometimes, the smallest step, one quiet voice saying, "I can play and can change everything." After the community concert, her life began to shift in ways she could never have imagined. The applause from that small hall still echoed in her ears, but now it was joined by messages, invitations, and opportunities she had never expected. The video of her gala performance continued to circulate online, shared and reshared by people who were amazed not only by her skill but by the story it told. A story of perseverance, humility, and hidden talent. At work, things were different too. Her co-workers looked at her with admiration but also with curiosity. Some joked gently, asking if she would perform at the next party or if she had secret plans to become famous. She laughed with them, careful not to let the attention change who she was. Deep down, though, she knew her life had already changed. People no longer saw her as just a waitress. She was a symbol of something greater, a reminder that anyone could surprise the world if they stayed true to themselves. One afternoon, she received a letter in the mail. It was an invitation to perform at a charity event in the city's cultural center, a much larger stage than the community hall. She felt nervous as she read it. Performing in front of strangers had always been intimidating, but this was different. This was not a small crowd of friendly faces. This was a prestigious event, and the audience would be filled with critics and people who knew music well. Still, she knew she could not turn it down. She remembered the moment at the gala, how it felt to play from her heart, and how that simple act had silenced a room full of people who had doubted her. That memory gave her courage. She accepted the invitation, promising herself that she would play the same way, honestly and fearlessly. In the days leading up to the event, she practiced every free moment she had. At home, she cleared a small space and placed a borrowed keyboard near the window. Her fingers moved across the keys as if no time had passed at all. Each note reminded her of the joy music had brought her throughout her life, and each melody strengthened her resolve to share it again. News of her upcoming performance spread quickly. People who had watched the gala video wanted to see her live again. Some came from far away, hoping to witness the same magic. For the first time, she realized that her talent had touched more lives than she had ever imagined. Strangers reached out to thank her for inspiring them, for reminding them that hidden potential could exist anywhere, in a waitress, a student, a neighbor, and that it deserved recognition. When the day of the cultural center performance arrived, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The hall was enormous, with rows of seats stretching farther than she could see, and a stage that seemed intimidating under the bright lights. Backstage, musicians tuned their instruments and staff hurried to prepare everything. She sat quietly, breathing deeply, trying to calm her nerves. A few moments later, it was her turn. She walked to the piano, the polished black surface reflecting the lights above. She ran her fingers gently across the keys, feeling the familiar sensation of connection and anticipation. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered the gala, the laughter, the doubt, and the silence that followed her first note. That memory reminded her why she was here, and she felt a quiet determination settle in her chest. The lights dimmed slightly and the audience grew still. When she pressed the first key, the hall was filled with a pure, clear sound. It was more than just music. It was emotion, experience, and life expressed through each note. She lost herself in the melody, moving from soft, tender passages to strong, uplifting sequences. Every note carried meaning, every chord told a story, and the audience felt it deeply. People leaned forward in their seats, their eyes fixed on her. Some closed their eyes, letting the music speak to them. Others held their breath, caught in the beauty and honesty of her performance. It wasn't just technical skill that amazed them. It was the emotion, the soul behind the music that touched every heart in the hall. When she finished, the audience erupted into applause, louder and more heartfelt than anything she had experienced before. Standing ovations filled the hall, people clapping, cheering, and even shouting words of praise. She smiled softly, feeling gratitude and humility wash over her. She had come a long way from being the quiet waitress in a busy restaurant, and yet she felt the same person inside, still grounded, still aware of what mattered. After the performance, several people approached her backstage. Some were musicians, others were event organizers, and many were simply audience members who wanted to express their admiration. Each person had a kind word or a story about how her music had touched them. One woman, tears in her eyes, said, "You reminded me why I love life. I had forgotten how music can make us feel alive." The experience made her realize that her gift was not just for herself. It was meant to be shared, to inspire, and to bring joy and hope to others. She understood that her music had the power to change people, to move them in ways that words often could not. And that realization filled her with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Over the next few weeks, invitations kept coming. Local schools asked if she would play for students. Community centers invited her to lead workshops. Charities requested her presence at events. Each invitation was a reminder that her life had opened to new possibilities, and she approached each opportunity with humility and care. She never forgot her roots, never let her growing recognition change her basic kindness and work ethic. At the same time, she remained committed to her regular work. She continued serving at the restaurant, helping customers with a gentle smile and supporting her coworkers. Some people found it strange. How could someone who had touched so many lives with her music still serve drinks and clean tables? But for her, it was simple. She had learned that life wasn't only about fame or recognition. It was about balance, about staying connected to reality, and about remaining true to oneself. Her story began to appear in newspapers and online articles more frequently. Journalists wrote about her perseverance, her humility, and the way she had transformed an ordinary night into an extraordinary moment of inspiration. Social media continued to buzz with clips of her performances and messages from people inspired by her journey. She read some of them late at night, sometimes smiling, sometimes quietly moved to tears. The words of strangers reminded her that her actions, however small she once thought them, could reach far beyond her own life. One afternoon, while preparing for another local performance, she received a message from a national music organization. They had seen her gala video and the cultural center performance and wanted to offer her a chance to play at a larger venue with professional support, a place where her music could be heard by thousands. It was overwhelming to consider, but she felt a deep sense of readiness. The thought of sharing her music on an even greater scale, filled her with excitement and determination. Despite all the attention and new opportunities, she remained grounded. She still found joy in small things: a quiet moment at the piano, a smile from a customer, a friendly conversation with a coworker. She had learned that recognition and praise were wonderful, but the true joy came from the music itself, from the act of creating, and from knowing that her talent had the power to inspire others. The nights when she played, whether in small halls or on larger stages, were moments of pure connection. She could feel the audience responding, not just to the notes but to the honesty and emotion behind them. And with each performance she grew more confident, more aware of her place in the world, and more certain that following her passion was the right path. By now, the story of the waitress who silenced the elite had become more than just a tale about a single performance. It had become a story about courage, about pursuing what you love even when circumstances seem impossible, and about the quiet strength that exists in ordinary people. Her journey inspired others to look beyond appearances, to recognize hidden potential, and to believe in themselves even when the world seemed indifferent. She had started her life in a small, unnoticed way, quietly serving others while keeping her talent private. Now she was a reminder to everyone that greatness can be found in unexpected places, and that the smallest act of bravery can create ripples far beyond what one could imagine. As she left the cultural center that evening, walking into the calm night, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The applause, the recognition, and the attention were wonderful, but the true reward was the knowledge that she had shared something meaningful. She had reclaimed her dream, touched hearts, and reminded the world of the beauty that exists in every hidden talent. And as she looked up at the stars, she understood that this was only the beginning. Her music, her story, and her courage would continue to grow, spreading hope and inspiration wherever she went. She was no longer just a waitress who played the piano. She was a symbol of what happens when talent meets bravery, and when ordinary people dare to believe in the extraordinary within themselves. The world she had stepped into after that night at the gala had grown wider, brighter, and more unexpected than she could ever have imagined. Invitations to perform continued to arrive, and each one brought a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She still worked at the restaurant, still carried trays and wiped tables, but now every simple gesture seemed to carry a quiet pride. She had discovered that talent, no matter how hidden, could shine in even the most unlikely moments. One morning, she received an invitation from a well-known music academy. They had seen the videos of her performances and wanted her to give a masterclass to students who were learning classical piano. She was hesitant at first, speaking to students, standing in front of a classroom full of young faces expecting guidance. It felt like stepping onto another kind of stage entirely. But as she read the letter again, she felt a small warmth inside. Maybe this was another chance to give back, to share not just her music but her story. The day of the master class arrived, and she walked into the classroom quietly, her hands folded in front of her. The students looked at her curiously. Some had heard her story. Others had only seen a few clips online. A few whispered to each other, exchanging wide-eyed glances. She smiled softly and nodded, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves. She began simply, speaking from her own experience. She told them about the nights she had practiced in secret, about the moments when she had doubted herself, and about the day she had finally taken a chance to play in front of others. The students listened intently, hanging on every word. She didn't speak to impress them. She spoke to be honest, to show that the path to success was often quiet, difficult, and full of patience. Then she sat at the piano. The students watched in silence as her fingers rested lightly on the keys. She started to play, letting the music flow gently through the room. With each note, she could see the faces of the students soften, their eyes reflecting emotion and focus. Some leaned forward, trying to absorb every sound. Others closed their eyes, letting themselves be carried by the music. When the last note faded, the room remained still for a moment, as if reluctant to break the spell. Then applause erupted, growing louder and more heartfelt than anything she had expected. The students stood and cheered, not just for the performance but for the courage it represented. For them, she had become proof that dreams could be pursued no matter the obstacles, and that talent could exist in the most ordinary of people. Afterward, students came forward to ask questions, to share their own struggles, and to seek advice. She listened carefully, offering encouragement and reassurance. Some asked about technique, others about how to overcome fear, and a few simply thanked her for showing them that perseverance mattered more than immediate recognition. She answered each question with patience, realizing that this moment was as much about giving hope as it was about music. Outside the classroom, the world continued to notice her. Newspapers and online platforms featured stories about her journey, emphasizing how a waitress had amazed the city's elite and now inspired students and ordinary people alike. Her story became a symbol, a reminder that greatness often hides behind quiet faces, unnoticed until a single opportunity brings it to light. One afternoon, she was invited to perform at a charity gala in another city. This time, she wasn't nervous because of doubt. She was nervous because she cared deeply about the people who would hear her music. She wanted her performance to be meaningful, not just technically impressive. On the night of the gala, she walked onto the stage with her back straight and her heart open. The crowd was large, filled with people from all walks of life, each one curious to see the woman who had silenced the elite. She sat at the grand piano, her fingers poised over the keys. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, remembering all the years she had spent practicing in quiet rooms, the nights she had doubted herself and the moments she had risked everything to follow her passion. Then she began to play. The music filled the hall, soft at first, building slowly into something rich and powerful. She poured every bit of her experience, every lesson learned, every quiet hope into the melody. The audience was spellbound. People forgot themselves, their status, their worries. They simply listened, carried away by the honesty and emotion in her music. Tears glistened in the eyes of some, while others smiled gently, moved by the beauty they were experiencing. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Standing ovations, cheers, and whistles filled the air. People called out asking for an encore, unable to let her leave the stage so quickly. She smiled softly, bowed, and allowed herself a small moment to feel the gratitude and joy that surrounded her. This was more than recognition. It was connection, and it reminded her why she had chosen to continue sharing her music. As she left the stage that night, she realized that her life had transformed completely. What had started as a single brave step, offering to play at the gala when no one expected her, had grown into a journey that touched countless lives. People who had once mocked or doubted her now saw her in a new light, and she had become a source of inspiration for both ordinary people and those who had influence and wealth. Even with her rising recognition, she remained grounded. She continued her work at the restaurant, appreciating the small joys of ordinary life. She greeted regular customers with warmth, helped her coworkers cheerfully, and found comfort in the simple rhythm of everyday routines. She understood that true fulfillment didn't come only from applause or fame, but from staying connected to herself and the people around her. Her story began to spread far beyond her city. Invitations arrived from across the country, asking her to perform, to teach, and to speak about her journey. People wanted to hear about the courage it took to pursue her passion, about the resilience she showed in the face of doubt, and about the quiet strength that ordinary people often carry within them. She shared her story honestly, always emphasizing that anyone could find their hidden potential if they were willing to take a chance. One day, she received a message from a young student who had watched her videos online. The student wrote about how her story had inspired them to practice their own instrument, to follow their dreams despite obstacles, and to believe in themselves when others doubted them. The words moved her deeply. She realized that the impact of her music went far beyond performance. It was about hope, encouragement, and the reminder that every person has something unique to offer the world. Over time, she noticed a change in how she felt about herself. She no longer questioned her abilities or worth. She had learned that talent and dedication could shine even in the most unlikely circumstances, and that a single act of courage could alter the course of a life. Her confidence was quiet and steady, born from experience rather than praise.